here, so you know me, Vanessa Koza, professor at WSU Tri-Cities. So I know that some of you are probably going to have to get out early, and that's totally fine, and I didn't time myself, so I might end up going over. So if you leave, no worries. First, I want to thank Sarah and Fuse for letting me do this. So what I want to talk about today is effective collaboration. So if you follow along on the handout I gave you, one of the things that is important when we're talking about really anything in terms of communication is what is that term that we're thinking about. So in other words, what is effective collaboration? And so that might seem like something simple, but because people have different cultural backgrounds and educational experiences and different values and beliefs, it's important to define terms. And so I do that here so we're all on the same page. So looking at the two definitions I put on the handout, interpersonal collaboration is a style of direct interaction between at least two co-equal parties voluntarily engaged in shared decision making as they work toward a common goal. The other one, by collaboration framework, it is a mutually beneficial and well-defined relationship entered into two or more organizations to achieve common goals. Okay, so with those two definitions for the purpose of the workshop today, we can kind of flesh out some of the important terms or underlining themes that come out of that. And so a couple things that I'm going to point out, not everything on the slide, but just the most important ones. Okay, so we know that collaboration isn't always voluntary. Sometimes we are forced to work with people in groups that we might not want to work with. I know that from being a teacher that I force my students to work in groups and they don't want to work together. So I'm sure that some of you have had that similar experiences like that, maybe not in education, but in the work that you do. So one of the things that I kind of mentioned in my description for the workshop today is to keep in mind that
so sorry.
That's okay.
Oh God.
No, I don't care, it's fine. If you were a student, I probably would have picked it up and been like, hello. But I'm not going to do that. So collaborative learning is something that we do in the classroom, especially in rhetoric and composition. And basically it's the idea that you work with other people in order to test your knowledge of certain things and in order to gain more knowledge from others. It's also this idea of knowledge and learning is social, because especially in the profession of writing, it's very independent, it's very isolated. But we try to teach students that in order to be creative, it's important to work with other people, right? So you can kind of exchange information, exchange knowledge. So when you're working in a collaborative group, it's important to get to know people and learn about them, right? What their emotional processes are, what they like, what they don't like, how they communicate, what are their experiences. So that's collaborative learning. The other basic principle that's important in collaboration, and a lot of you guys know this stuff, participants should be valued. So everybody has something to contribute, right? Whatever that thing is. Everybody's work has worth and is important to that group and has something to contribute. Shared responsibilities, so there's always going to be some kind of structures, some clearly defined goals. Division of labor, planning, communication mediums are determined. All of you guys, I think, pretty much do that. I know Fuse does that. Shared accountability, so leadership should be shared. Everybody should have some type of control. There should also be an awareness of risk. We're all in this together. If we mess up, it's going to affect all of us. It's not just going to be one person. So keeping that in mind. An example of shared accountability, like how do you achieve that, which you probably already do this. You might rotate roles, monitor time with agendas, record minutes, celebrate individual and team accomplishments, which is something I know Fuse has done recently. And then shared resources and rewards. Just make sure that whatever resources you have, if you have access to people of authority, research, whatever, that it's for the entire group and not just one or two individual people. So those are the basic principles. And those things, pretty much most of you understand and know, those are the things that are necessary in collaboration. So, now, I ask what factors are helping or hindering your collaboration efforts. So this is kind of a chance, because I wanted to make this interactive, but I know I don't have enough time. So I created this handout because I want you to think about, just take like a minute or two to go through that list on the handout and choose one collaborative relationship. Because when I actually took the survey and I did this, I was thinking of all these different collaborative relationships, and it's too much. So just think of one collaborative relationship that you're in now and make it a workplace, a work relationship. What are the things that are positive in that collaboration, and what are the things that you think are negative? So this is a way to kind of help you self-reflect and reflect on what's working in that group and what's not working. Hi. Yeah.
There are pens here, guys, too, if you want some pens.
You don't have to.
Works, so maybe I'll grab another
Here, I'll
one.
pass some sort of around me.
Anybody else need pens? Nope. I think everybody has them, I guess.
Okay.
And you can do what my students do and just good doodle and try to stay awake and as you're reading this list, think about what things have been working with the group that you've been working with. So which things are present and which ones do you notice need work that maybe you haven't thought about before. So there might be something where you thought, oh crap, like I didn't even realize we were doing this. Okay, so even if you didn't finish the positive negative checklist on the front page, on the first page, did any of you notice, were there some things that were present, that were positive, that worked well in the collaborative relationships that you thought about? And were there things that surprised you about maybe the negative ones that you thought, oh, I didn't even realize this was happening in this relationship, in this group? You don't have to share, but maybe
Not sure the benefits outweigh the cost.
of your
That's
collaborative
my
relationship.
Collaborative relationship. 'Cause it takes us on average about a year to 4 years just to acquire software. So a lot of the collaboration is about checking and rechecking and rechecking and rechecking documents. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things like, is this time that we're spending really worth
Worth the effort.
worth just taking just to buy a piece of software?
Gotcha. Yeah. So the benefits outweigh the cost, or the
Cost.
outweigh the benefits. Yeah.
And I don't want to focus only on negative, but specifically for my work, frequent problem that we encounter is the perception of threat, competition for resources or clients. So
Yeah.
other groups feel like, well, I'll come to your meeting or I'll help you with your project. But
Right.
if I help you too much and it's successful, you're going to steal resources that I need for my project away from me, so why would I want to help you?
Exactly, yeah. So there's that sense of competition.
Yeah.
Which is a huge problem in education because it seems to be this value that gets reinforced, and I think that seeps into our workplace, right? Depending on the people that we work with. So that's really important.
Right.
Any others?
On the positive side, I'd say perception that collaboration is needed is one. I think everybody at
Yeah.
a fundamental level understands that it's important to work together, and businesses and workplaces are always trying to make it more likely to occur, but there's a lot of challenges.
It's impossible for anybody to do everything.
Yeah.
Right.
You have to work with other people.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Chances exist for regular contact and exchange of information. That's one that I've seen. It's funny because I hadn't thought of it in regards to collaboration, but I've seen that go both ways in organizations that I've been a part of,
Yeah.
and it's strange how many different factors can affect that.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Exactly.
are you in an open office environment? Are you in offices that are close to each other? You know,
Or the door is closed.
are you remote?
Yeah.
Any of those? Yeah.
Mhm.
Similarity or overlap in resources and goals. I've seen that a lot in Hanford between organizations, where you have one organization serving another, and servicing the other organization is actually against their goals. Like, the more they help the other organization, the less work they have for themselves, but they're the
Right.
only people you can get service from. So
Yeah.
it implodes.
I was thinking about that in just the two-person business that Brendan and I have, how it's actually helpful that we have some overlap in resources and goals. So like the
And finance.
positive side of that.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
Well, I mean, really, you know, if one of you makes money, then it's kind of like you both make money. So.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true. Definitely, yeah. But I mean, like, as far as I think like service too, like if there's some overlap, it's helpful.
Right.
Rather than having like jobs that are very like
Defined.
yeah, and like insular from
Yeah.
every other job. It's nice to have a little bit of like,
Easier to balance one between each
It is.
things back and forth.
and if you understand what your collaborator is working on and how your work can help them and vice versa, it's beneficial.
It's interesting how when the players see each other's valuable resources and sources really can cause that competition for resources.
Right.
Negative aspect too.
Yes.
Everybody's valuable. I don't want to be involved.
And then there's that everybody's valuable, but you don't want to get taken advantage of, and you don't want people to, take advantage of people. Okay, so one more thing I'm going to have you do before we talk about, well, this is great. What do we do about it? So the next thing I want you to look at, so you talked about, you reflected on your collaborative relationship as a whole, right? What's working and what's not working in the relationship I'm thinking about, in the working relationship that I'm thinking about. Now what you want to ask yourself is, are you an effective communicator? So I want you to self-reflect. And I took the survey earlier, and it took me about a little over 5 minutes, but like I said, make sure you think about one working relationship. Because I started thinking about all my relationships, social, romantic, working, and I was like, oh man, I need improvement and this and that. So you want to think about a working collaborative relationship and answer those questions accordingly.
I'm also having a problem with the survey because sometimes there's only answers. I feel like it's also.
Yeah, oh yeah, I had a lot of those. Those of you that were filling it out, some of you did it fairly quickly, like you were going down in numbers, and maybe you were just doing all threes. Others really seem like you were stuck. Maybe you reread the prompt a couple times. It's not the greatest survey in the world, but it's something for the sake of today. So those of you that finished it and actually scored yourself, whether you did the first page or both of them, were you surprised at the results?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because I consider myself a pretty effective communicator, but my results said that I needed some improvement. So.
Yeah, that's.
I'm not disagreeing with it. I'm just saying I was surprised by it.
Yeah, I felt like that today too. It was like, wait, need improvement? What? Yeah.
Wait, I'm perfect. How is
Is
that possible?
Is the camera up?
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say, I could tell as I was answering questions that it would be not the score I was hoping for.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh, I don't do that enough. Oh, yeah.
I felt the same way. I was reading this and I'm like, oh, that's a really great idea. And I do not do that, and I should.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the survey kind of gives you an idea whether you agree with the scoring or not. At least those prompts give you an idea of these are the things that you might want to do when you are communicating with other people. Like one of them is don't try to problem solve when you're angry, which is something that I do in certain types of relationships, not working relationships, but other relationships. We have to take care of this right now, right? I'm still angry at you, but I want to talk about it, right? So at least it gives you a sense of, okay, maybe don't do these things, take a step back and self-reflect and, use I statements, or I feel, or I think that, don't be angry when you're trying to problem solve and things like that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
Okay, so this is great and everything, and you guys, I kind of put you within some context, right? I had you self-reflect, I had you think about your own working relationships, your collaborative relationships in the workplace. Now we need to talk about, okay, what are the things we need to keep in mind? What are the things we can do to practice these, to actually achieve a better score on that survey? So what I've couched this all under is we need effective communication. And so there are 3 different types of ways or strategies to think about this. First, there's effective communication itself and the basics of effective communication, and then of course bring my field into it, rhetorical theory, which I'll talk a little bit about, creating a collaborative culture. There are core strategies that we need to pay attention to, and then needs to be a sense of connection, and a lot of you are familiar with these, I think. So we'll talk about each of these. Okay, in terms of effective collaboration, so we have some basics that I'm going to cover, and then speaking, listening, and body language all has to do with rhetoric. So if you want to take a look at that comic I threw up there. Okay, so some basics to keep in mind. All right, you should always have face-to-face interaction. So face-to-face interaction is important because that's how you get to know people. Remember I talked about collaborative learning? The only way you're going to learn about other people, their emotional processes and how they function in groups, which is group dynamics, is to actually have face-to-face interaction. And I think with technology, it makes it easier to not have that face-to-face interaction, right? The other thing is it's important to think about size of groups. So 5 to 7 members is ideal because it's not too big where it gets crazy, but it's enough where it can be diverse in points of view and perspectives. If you have a group of 20, and I'm sure you guys have done this, then you break it off into smaller groups, and then each group reports back to the larger group. So you guys are familiar with that. Other basics, communicative practices should be determined. So you guys already do this, at least most of you. You determine whether you're going to use Hackpad or Slack or email or whatever in order to communicate certain little things. But for the decision-making processes should be face-to-face. because when you're making decisions, especially high order decisions, you want to be in a group, face to face, and you want to make sure that everybody understands that the decision process is happening and that a decision's being made. So it's really important for people to ask questions. Is a decision being made right now? Are we deciding on something? What's the decision being made? The other thing is that in the group, you should develop some kind of group norms. And you probably do this, where you say, all right, meeting time's gonna start at noon, and we're gonna be done by 1. We are going to meet once a week. A couple other examples, respecting diverse points of view, so we're gonna take turns, everybody's gonna get to talk. When we meet once a week, this is how it's going to be structured, so that make that a norm. So allowing equal participation, I already mentioned that. Speaking, listening, and body language. Okay, so that's where the rhetoric comes in. So just for the sake of my presentation, basic definition of rhetoric is the study of or understanding effective strategies in order to communicate, whether oral or written, right? And we can talk about digital communication and art communication, in order to communicate to a specific audience for a specific purpose, right? So what becomes important is audience and purpose. So one of the things that you want to keep in mind when you're thinking about communication is the idea that, just make sure I don't forget anything, language has changed over time. So because language has changed over time, it's not just pen to paper anymore, right? It's not just maybe traditional ways of speaking, but now we have different mediums that facilitate discussion. Now it's not just words, but it's symbols, right? And so because we have symbols, we have words, we have images, we have environment is kind of a type of language, right? The way that we're set up in this room, we're not like in rows, we're in a circle, right? So there's no focal point. It's like we're trying to have a discussion. We're trying to collaborate right now, right? By making an interactive presentation. So those are the things that kind of have to do with symbols. We use symbols in order to communicate. And sometimes those symbols can be misinterpreted and misunderstood. And so keeping that in mind, there's this concept called the rhetorical situation, where it describes the circumstances where communication takes place. So you have a subject or a topic, you have context, which is the circumstances or the situation in which things are happening. So right now we're communicating, we're at Fuse, there are people working in the other room, it's lunchtime, there are people setting up other events, whatever. Situation in which the communication is taking place. And then there's purpose. What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to communicate? And then audience. All right, so you have to know your audience. And everybody pretty much knows that. Who are you communicating to, right? So I have to, because you're not students, I have to think of a way to present the information that's going to be different than I do it in the classroom. So my PowerPoints normally don't look like this. They have a lot more writing on them, which is probably something I need to work on, but it's because I try to guide them in note-taking, right? A couple other things. So actually, I want to go back for just 1 minute. I mentioned listening, speaking, and body language. So that survey pretty much asks you about your listening and speaking skills. It doesn't really ask you about body language, but we all know that body language is important. And so even when you're face-to-face and you're interacting with your colleagues, you know, what do you want to do? You don't want to be like, you know, like, I really don't care, or whatever. You want to be thinking about your posture, you want eye contact, you want appropriate gestures, you don't want to roll your eyes. You know, if you want to roll your eyes later, then, you know, that's up to you. But you really want face-to-face, facing that person, eye contact, expressive body language, and so on. Okay, so creating a collaborative culture. A couple things, and you guys probably already are familiar with these things, and maybe you do them, and if you don't, or you know that people don't do them, then this is something that needs to be addressed. So, a commentary. In order for collaborative relationships to work well, it's important to acknowledge people's successes, right? It's important to appreciate what people do and understand. And so I saw this yesterday, an example of in Slack when Aaron said something, I think it was Justin, and she acknowledged him and appreciated his work, right? So that's commentary, yeah. So that's something that should be done all the time in collaborative relationships, right? Self-determination, so being able to problem solve with other people, being able to ask questions, negotiate. So instead of saying, like, if you're trying to problem solve and you're like, all right, we need to figure something out. We need to figure out where we're going to put this table. I want to put this table here. As opposed to saying, what if we were to put the table right here? What do you think about that? That's a different way to get people to, oh, yeah, right? Instead of being very commanding and dominating and saying, I want this here. Just, what if we do this, right? So thinking about problem solving and thinking about the type of rhetoric you're using to problem solve. Thinking about collegiality. So don't think that everybody's trying to be competitive, right? Even though that's hard not to think that way because of the way that we're brought up in schools, right? At least that's what I think. Be attentive to different perspectives and don't make assumptions. I always do this. Every time somebody starts talking, I feel like I know where they're going to go. And I'm already like making up stories in my head and thinking, oh my gosh, they think my work's terrible. Oh my God, I'm doing a horrible job. And I start to make these assumptions. So try not to do that. If you're not sure about something, like if you're reading something the wrong way, just ask. Can you repeat that in a different way? Did you mean this? And then that way you can get more information instead of drawing conclusions, right? Culture. So recognizing the values, beliefs, and behaviors that govern the community and organization. So what governs Fuse, for example? What are the values, beliefs, and behaviors that are kind of the norm, accepted? Being familiar with those. That's part of the culture of that specific community. And then thinking about your place within that culture. How does Jaime fit in to this culture? What does he bring to it? What is your place in it? So thinking about that. Finally, posture. So posture, we know posture is like posture, right? Instead of like what I usually do. So posture in this sense has to do with choosing a personally fulfilling role. So make sure you're contributing something that you can contribute, that you feel comfortable contributing. And that takes a lot of confidence, a lot of self-reflection, and knowing that you're able to do the work, right? Knowing that, yeah, I'm awesome. I'm a great coder, right? I'm awesome at like working in groups and doing. I'm not a good coder. No, I'm giving you an example. I don't know anything about coding. Use the power to educate is another thing. So in collaborative learning, you're educating others. They're educating you because they have knowledge that you might not have. And so you're sharing that knowledge with each other. So being able to educate is important. And I mentioned self-confidence and also self-care is another one. Okay, let's see. Okay, a couple other things. So other things that are under this umbrella of effective communication. So we talked about collaborative culture. Now we're looking at core strategies, things that we can think about and use in order to be effective communicators and to work well with others. So manage the flow of communication. Be patient, right? But at the same time, set deadlines. But if those deadlines can be met, try to be flexible, right? If you can. Don't take it personal. That's hard. I do that all the time where I'm like, that person doesn't like me. They don't like my idea, they don't like me. Allow time for people to speak. So that's why it's important to kind of set those group norms. When are we going to start the meeting? When are we going to end the meeting? And are we going to give everybody time to speak within this time frame? And don't move on too quickly. So it's kind of like allow people to speak, but at the same time, don't try to rush it. I mean, there's a way you can do that, right? I have to do it in the classroom all the time when like class is over and students are like still talking, which is great, but I'm like, we gotta go. So I'm just like, hey, this is a really great conversation. Maybe we can continue it next class period, or we can talk via email or out in the hall or whatever. Ways to respond is really important. So just not all of these are going to probably apply to your situation, but advising, evaluating, analyzing, interpreting, reassuring, supporting, those are different ways to respond to people. So you can be supportive with other people and say, just what Erin did, the commentary, just saying, Justin, you're awesome. That is a way to respond to somebody. That is acknowledging their work, right? That's evaluating, kind of, right? And supporting and reassuring. Question, probing, understanding, and paraphrasing. These are all different ways to respond. Improving relationships. Self-reflect. Reflect on your own strengths and challenges as a team member. You probably didn't think I was going to make you do that today, but that's really important. Reflect on what you do in those collaborative relationships, because what you do is going to affect what other people do, right? So make sure you reflect on those things. Developing a positive attitude means avoiding criticism and judgment, which is really hard to do, but it's something that if you can have a positive attitude, if you can try to avoid judgment, if somebody's taking forever to complete a task, I'd probably just ask them, hey, do you need help with this? Let me help you. What do you want me to do? And I do that a lot at work. What can I do to help you so you can get this done? Don't jump to conclusions. We already talked about that. Make sure you get all the information you need. Resolve conflicts. Address negative situations quickly. So don't let it just turn into rage and, you just explode, but address it quickly. And so I know that's really hard. You can have somebody who's the mediator, who's like the facilitator. If you don't feel comfortable having that discussion, maybe just have a few people in the group who are maybe aware of the situation and have somebody facilitate and have a conversation. Or if it's something that affects the entire group, then just have everybody kind of be involved in it, right? And it should be a face-to-face interaction, which I say that, but usually I resolve my conflicts like via email or messenger, which is not good, right? Let's see. The other thing you can do to resolve conflicts is by the end of the meeting, before the meeting ends, maybe give 5 to 15 minutes to ask people, are there any problems that you think we need to address? And so that's another way to be able to problem solve and address negative issues immediately. If you just I'm not saying you have to do it every single week you meet, but maybe once out of the month, all right, let's take our 5 to 15 minutes. What do you want to put on the table? The other idea, and this is kind of like, this is what I do in class, but I pass out index cards and they don't put their names on it. And I ask them, what worked, what didn't work? What problems are you having? And so because the index cards are anonymous, nobody knows who said what. And then I take those and address them the next class. So you can kind of do something like that. If people aren't comfortable bringing up certain problems, maybe just have them do something that it's anonymous, and then those issues can be discussed without anybody knowing who brought them up. Let's see. almost. Oh, wait. No, not yet. Not yet. A couple other things. Couple other important things to mention under improving relationships. Set boundaries. So develop friendships with colleagues, but at the same time, make sure you have boundaries, right? How you don't have to like everyone. You don't have to hang out with everyone. So decide, is this a professional relationship, or is it professional and is it more than that, right? Are we friends that hang out outside of work, right? And those are boundaries that you need to set. Be respectful, of course, and understand and accept personal and cultural differences, and that's a huge thing. So understanding where people are coming from. Like, one of the things I learned about myself is I'm a people pleaser. I think that's part of my background. It's part of my culture. So might it be beneficial when I'm working in a certain group, and I've done this before, where I've talked to my colleague and I said, well, I tend to do these things. Can you help me with that? Can you be aware of that? And because my colleague is also a friend, she's very aware of that. And she says, Vanessa, it's okay. I can take care of this Excel spreadsheet. You don't have to worry about it. Or I'll meet with the student. You don't have to worry about it. Go do your other work. So there's like this understanding, because she knows this is the way I am. Okay, how can we work with that and use it to our benefit, right? Not see it as a flaw. And finally, celebrate accomplishments, which great example of that is the barbecue that Fuse had, where people were giving awards for different things that they accomplished or different things that they did or how they contributed to Fuse. So that's something that should be done, ideally should be done in all workspaces, right? Celebrating people's accomplishments, which is kind of rare at WSU, but that's okay, I'm used to it. Finally, so I know I usually ask people if they have questions, but I was flying by because I know it's lunchtime and people need to get out of here and go back to work. But I do have a final thoughts on the handout. We don't have to address these questions. We have about a little over 15 minutes, so if people can stay, we can kind of leave it open to questions or discussion. But just some final thoughts I had. Which of the ideas presented make the most sense to you? Which elements have you found most challenging in your own experiences with teams? And we sort of talked about that a little bit. And what have I missed in thinking about collaboration?
So I loved your last point about sort of having a relationship at work that was keeping you accountable for certain things. I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has gaps in their abilities and things that maybe need help from collaborators, and it's awesome to have a relationship, a working relationship that's such that you can sort of trust each other with those things and help each other.
Right.
Yeah, in areas where you're maybe not as strong. So,
Yeah. And I think that's easier to do when you're friends with the person.
Sure.
When it's more than just a professional relationship, right? Then you can be more vulnerable and open yourself up and say, here's the group dynamic. This is how I function in groups. How can we negotiate and work on this together, right? It's harder, I think, when you're not necessarily friends with the person. But then that could be something, again, where you don't have that conversation by yourself with that person. You have it in the group. Yeah.
So during your presentation, you talked a little bit about the importance of face-to-face interaction, and when you're making an important decision, trying to meet with that person face-to-face. With my job, I work remotely with a lot of both colleagues and customers, some of whom I've met in person once or twice, some of whom I've never met in person.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people that sometimes I'm on the phone with them an hour or two a day, or in email or instant message and chat.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, what sort of strategies do you have for when you have that actual physical limitation to be able to collaborate with them effectively, because like you said, some of the people that I've met face to face, our relationships have gone a lot smoother after
Right.
we've been able to kind of appreciate and talk to each other face to face and understand, but I don't have that with everybody I work with. So what can you kind of do there to improve or facilitate those relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if people have access to the same technology, I mean, technology makes it easier for us to be remote and to be able to see each other face to face. So I use Google Hangouts, I use Talkie, I use Skype. I think there's a component in Messenger where you can do video. So if you can do some kind of video. Conferencing or chat, at school we have this, it's called AMS, so it's, kind of forget what it stands for, but it's basically the people that take care of all the video conferencing, because some professors teach courses out to Pullman
Right.
and Vancouver. So we have video and we can chat face to face with our students. The downside to that is it's, to me, impersonal, because I'm behind a computer screen or whatever, and it's like there's that the sense of, you know, there's the gestures and the facial expression and the body language is still there.
Right.
But I feel like, you know, there are problems to it where sometimes there's lag time. So addressing those, I mean, that's a topic for, I guess, another tutorial, but addressing those things, I would just say, you know, we need to be okay with awkward silences. We need to be okay with talking over each other, because it's gonna happen,
Oh, it
right?
happens all the time.
Yeah, right? And so that, I think, is great if you can set up a couple meetings where you guys are doing video chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah.
It really resonated with me, the idea that it's hard to collaborate with people that compete with each other.
Oh, yeah.
That's basically what I've run into in the handful of my life. It's just like everybody is in competition with each other the entire time,
Mhm.
and it makes it really hard to work.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't have a solution for that, because I was in a position where I felt like I was in competition with colleagues when I was a tenure track professor and working on research. Because that's the culture, it's the prestige, elite, you know, you have to be on the top. And that's not my personality. So getting my, just changing positions and changing job descriptions, now I'm in a lot more collaborative environment. And that's why I'm doing things that engage the community, because I believe in it. So, yeah, that's tough. Does anybody know how you can address competition?
I was going to ask a similar question, and it has to do with using rhetoric. I mean, you in a group, you intend to convince people and reach a result that you get your ideas across and convince people, which might be counter to the group's common goal of getting work done.
Right.
And so I was going to ask, you know, what are some ways that you can affirm in a competitive environment the fact that, hey, we're all working together.
I have something that
Yeah.
may help with that. So the company that I work for, VMware, like, has been branching into other spaces. One of them that they branched into is network technology, where Cisco is kind of the king of that. And so now they're kind of in what I've heard internally called a frenemy relationship, in that they're enemies in that they're competitors in this one specific area, but there's a whole lot of stuff that they still need to collaborate on.
Right.
And I think the most important thing in doing that is to, first of all, acknowledge it, put it out there publicly, and say, hey, I understand that we're in competition for this specific thing, or in our job duties, or whatever it is. But even putting that aside, there's still these things that we both have to work on together for our mutual benefit. So let's focus on what we can do together that's mutually beneficial to both of us. And then on the competitive side, you know, let the best woman or the best man win. And we're still going to be competitive there, but that doesn't mean that we can't interact with each other. We just have to acknowledge that competition exists, but we still have common ground as well. Right.
Don't dance around it or pretend.
Yeah, don't
Don't
pretend like it doesn't
bring it
exist,
up
don't
and
ignore
say
it, just
something.
Bring it out.
openly acknowledge it and be very forthcoming about it.
And I wonder, in the beginning I talked about basic principles of collaboration, and I mentioned like shared responsibility and how when you first start out you want to set up a structure and have division of labor. So if you do divide the labor and you say this is what you're responsible for, can that help alleviate competition? Because everybody is responsible for this one task. So then the competition would be, oh, my poster looks better than whatever you had to work on. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. But I really like what Justin was saying. I think that's a way to address it.
One thing that I help to do with my students, because oftentimes they find me in opposition to them, and I really reinforce that I focus on what their goals are and then do my best to align myself with those goals in some way and speak directly to those goals, so that I establish, not just by saying we're on the same team, but aligning myself with the direction that they're wanting to go, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
So I've found, like, I come from a university research background where it's like super, super competitive, and I've sort of had to change the way that I think, which I feel like I've done pretty well. But like, yeah, trying to kind of convince people that they don't have to be in that mindset of competition.
Right.
Because I mean, really, not everyone is in a situation where there's, really direct competition. So.
Sounds perceived.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of times, yeah. So you kind of have to make sure that the people you're collaborating with know that you want them to succeed. Like, you actually have a vested interest in their success.